All right, maybe we should get started. And maybe a good way to start would be with introductions. Dr. Jens, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself first.
Sure. As you can see on the slide, I'm up here in Middletown. Um, and one thing I always wonder about speakers is what are their credentials for doing this sort of thing? Uh, and so I have to say that I was involved with running a poster competition for something called NICOMIC. Dr. Kozlowski was actually involved with that at one point. Which is a consortium of all the residency program, osteopathic residency programs in the New York City area. So we did poster competitions for about 15 years, and I might have learned a little bit during that period. At least I hope so. Um, okay.
And yeah, I'm Tim Valente. I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian at the Toro College Libraries. So I'm interested in all aspects of scholarly communication, and poster sessions are definitely one. Conferences, online conferences. I'll be showing some of the resources that the libraries offer to support you in creating posters. And very excited to be here with Dr. Jens to talk about creating posters. So I'll advance the slides and just make sure that everything's coming through clearly, which it
All
seems like
right.
it is.
Oh, nice little dissolve. Okay. Yeah, actually, this is extremely important because the library is such an important part of scholarly activity, and having their involvement, their participation in working with posters, I think is going to be a tremendous benefit to everybody, especially since they have a template that they will talk to you about. Okay, so we do have an objective for this, which basically is at the end of this program, you should be able to create a creditable poster. Uh, I have to point out this is not a master class, although it dawned on me maybe we should do something like that in the future so that we can guarantee that you'll get first place every time you go out and do posters, but this is not going to be it. This is the basics. So let's go to the next poster. I've pulled out a few posters for examples, and one of the things I like to do during this presentation is have you do some judgments about what what you think about these posters. So look at this poster, and we really don't have time probably to just toss comments in the chat, although you could do that if you wish. But the impression is it's lovely. There's lots of nice colors and stuff like that. Oh my goodness. Uh, with the chemical signatures and stuff. But there's one thing that strikes me, and you find it in so many posters, you almost can't read it. Look at the small print. Uh, it's a lovely poster, but the print is very small. And so we'll be going through some specific examples later on. So let's go to the next slide. Where, where do you get the template? I mean, how do you do these things? Well, you'll get some details at the end from Tim, but basically they come from two places. And if you're really innovative, you can get it from three. But there are massive numbers of templates on the internet. If you do something like research poster template, you'll get about 1,000. And some of them cost money, some of them don't. Most of them are filled in. So what you have to do is take the filled in one, you have to edit them, you have to take out what's there, put in what you want to put in. And it's quite a piece of work. The best way is if your institution has one, and fortunately Toro does, and you'll learn all about it. The third way is you can actually create it directly from PowerPoint. They told me you could do that. I actually tried and I haven't been able, but you supposedly can do an original one from PowerPoint, but I definitely recommend getting it from Toro. It's much, much easier. And Tim has actually put in the library guide here that tells you where to go to get the posters, and he will go over this in much more detail later on. I guess the one thing I want to say first is how do you get all this stuff into the poster? Now, the poster basically is a PowerPoint, but if you look in the PowerPoint setup, there is something called a poster, and you can actually specify poster within PowerPoint. And then basically what you do is you create a text offline in Word probably, and then you basically do a lot of cutting and pasting. So you get the illustration and you paste them in, you get the text, you paste it in, then you try to get it to fit. You can adjust the font size, you can adjust the font, you can fiddle with it. And so that's the fun. I would try to get everything to fit is a blast. Basically, there are two types, obviously research and clinical presentations. So, a research poster is what you think it is. It's going to summarize a study. But there's a key here. You want to have enough detail without overwhelming. And that's where we start talking about the size of the print. You don't want to overdo it. This is not a journal article. This is a poster. And the whole purpose of a poster is to get somebody interested in what you're doing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Clinical poster should summarize the key points. And again, the viewers might want to use this to apply it to what they've seen. I actually ran into a nice example of this with a colleague that I was working with when I was down at the Medical College of Georgia. His wife, he was a family physician, and his wife had this lesion on her arm that he couldn't identify. Now, here's a guy that's been in practice, 30 years, and his wife gets something. Can you imagine what she's saying to him? You can't figure out what's on my arm. But all of a sudden, he saw a poster that had exactly the same lesion. And by George, it turned out to be an extremely rare spider that was in Georgia. I mean, he thought about spiders, but he didn't think about this one because it was so rare. So it took a poster to show him what it was. So that's, when you go to poster competitions, you kind of browse the aisle, and now we browse the web. And if you see something that looks like something you're looking for, something you might have seen, then it makes sense. That's what you're after, somebody who is interested in what you've done, what you found. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Ohio University has very generously identified some timelines for preparing posters. And they have them for both case reports and for research studies. But the case report's a little more easier, a little longer, actually. They're both about the same. So note that there's about a 10-month lag between the time you come up with the idea and the time you actually go to the contest. So what this says is we don't recommend you put something together the week before it's due. It's not likely to work out too well. 10 months may be a little long, but boy, I would think 4 months maximum, because it takes time to put something. You have to do the literature review. In a case study, you have to work up the case, you have to write it up, you have to get information from people who may have worked on it, and so on. And then putting it together, like I said, creating a poster is something that probably is a several-day process, unless you really want to kill yourself. Okay, next slide. So what's involved? If you're planning a poster, you need to take account of, is it going to cost you anything? Typically here at Turo, we have the printers available that will prepare posters for you, and normally it's not going to cost anything. But there may be cases where that, you may not have access to it. Um, Obviously, you want to think about what's going to go into it, the design factors, what we talked about, and then finally the presentation. What's the format that you're going to be using? Next slide. Find a poster that can be easily transported. This is if we're doing the plain routine, if you're going someplace. If it's on the web, like so many things are these days, this is irrelevant. You can forget all about it. Likewise, mounting a poster. There are many ways that you can mount it, different sizes and stuff like that. Again, if it's on the web, who cares, right? And then you don't have much in the way of additional costs. You don't have to pay for poster paper. You just put it up on the website and there you are. But we may go back to the old ways at some point. A lot of people like the idea of in-person poster competitions. We'll probably see that within the next year. And so you need to remember these tips for that purpose. So when you're doing a poster, you don't want to have a long title. You want to have it really no more than 10 words. The title's published in the conference proceedings. You want to have something that's kind of catchy. And I've seen quite a few that are catchy. Unfortunately, I don't remember what they were, but at the same time, it should accurately reflect the content, because remember, people are browsing the slides on the internet, or they're walking up and down the aisles. They're going through a lot of these things. And so it's almost a tactistoscopic thing. They're just going to look at it, and if it catches their interest like that, they'll stop. If it doesn't catch their interest, they'll just keep on going. So that's why you want a title that is short, something that people can process quickly and decide whether they want to stop or not. Remember, the whole purpose of posters is to encourage people to talk with you. And the idea is, if you dialogue with people, it will help you with the study or the report that you're doing. You can improve it at some point for the next poster competition. And ideally, a poster should be the first step in doing a paper, a publication. So you want to dialogue with people, and that's going to improve the final product that you're going to end up with. That's why you want people to stop. Okay, you're going to have a title panel. Recommended font size for the title, at least 1 inch, maybe even longer, but you want to be able to see it from a distance of 3 or 4 feet. Again, this is if you're doing the aisle routine. Because that's about how far, I remember the aisles, there's like 4 feet between the posters, and you're trying to fight your way up with people on both sides. So you're not going to be able to get up tight and close. You're going to need to be able to read that the title from a bit of a distance. And again, you want to print it in bold print, combination of title and sentence casing, but you want to make it very clear. In the poster itself, you need to include the purpose in a few sentences. If you're doing research, specify your hypotheses. And again, I like lists, number your items so that, again, you want to make it easy to read. You don't want to wade through text. For the research, when you submit the abstract, you'd better have almost completed your study. I know when I'm reviewing them, if it looks like, yeah, well, we're kind of gathering data and we may get finished. No, that's not going to be acceptable. Likewise, for the case study, you'd better have an unusual case, and you pretty much better have it prepared before you submit it. Now, the first step in the poster processing is you have a call for abstracts. The organization like Toro, here, send us your abstract. We're going to evaluate it. We'll determine in most cases whether that abstract is going to turn out to be an actual poster or whether it's going to be, well, we'll put it in the book, but you're not going to be able to display it. It's not going to be in competition for the funding, for the awards. So the abstract's important. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Once it's accepted, you get a letter that outlines specific information about the poster session. It's going to tell you when and where, how to set it up, the type of display opportunities, all the information you need to actually do it. Okay, next slide. Now, I love this part. The key to a successful presentation is to provide information in a format that attracts participants. Like I said, that's what you want to do. You want to attract people. Like, pretty flowers attract bees, right, to get the honey. Well, that's what we want to do with posters. So the key elements in research, you have to have a good abstract, good purpose and problem, conceptual framework, method, good data analysis, findings, conclusions. That's all part of the elements that you want for research. Case study, abstract, you want history, description of the case, background, the problem, treatments, outcome, lessons learned, application to clinical practice. For both of these, you want to draw conclusions that people will be able to use. Otherwise, why do they care, right? If it's not something that they can use, they're not going to bother. Okay, next one. So in the research poster, you want to include in the methods section a brief discussion and how you collected the data. You want to talk about the design, theoretical or conceptual framework, if it's applicable. Describe the instruments you used to measure the variables, how the data were collected, and certainly the number of subjects and statistical techniques. We'll be talking about that. For the clinical side, you want to have a description of the project, objectives, and process that took place during the clinical activity, and key players. If orthopedics was heavily involved, be sure to give them credit. Certainly you want to provide adequate information about how these things were conducted. But again, you don't want to overdo it. Keep it brief. For the research poster, how the data analysis was performed, what statistics you used. You can use symbols, greater than, less than, stuff like that. Again, describe your sample. And it's always good to use charts or graphs, especially on a poster. Even in journal articles, I hate these journal articles where the text goes on and on about, here's the mean for this, the standard deviation, and then blah, blah. I like tables because they are so descriptive, or graphs, much easier to understand. Okay, keep on. Again, you want the major findings, results, and again, you tie the results back to the hypothesis. Again, don't overwhelm the participant. Just the pertinent data. Remember Just the Facts, Ma'am from Jack Webb, if anybody remembers Jack Webb. But just the facts. And remember, the key thing is for the hypotheses, you want to talk about the specific data that relate to the hypotheses, the results will relate to the hypotheses. Everything else goes into discussion. And again, just discuss the data analysis and the major data. In a clinical poster, you want to include the positive findings, the impact. What was the impact of the project on the people involved, but especially applications to clinical practice. How are people going to be using these? And the clinical people who come and look, they'll say, oh yeah, and they'll discuss this with you. And that's the fun part. Okay, next one. In the conclusion section, you want to talk about the findings. Again, circle back, relate the findings back to the purpose of the study. Be sure you answer the research questions and especially the implications for practice or research. If you did find significant results, how these results will impact clinical practice. In some cases, you might even have recommendations for changes in clinical practice. And then certainly directions for future studies. And I just want to mention parenthetically, for people who are looking for projects, the best place to look is the last two paragraphs of a research paper, because typically there's going to be recommendations for future research. Well, put that in here. What are potential recommendations for future research, whether you're going to do it yourself or whether other people might do it? I haven't read down here because it's important. When people look at a poster, the first thing they'd look is at the title, right? And the next thing they're going to look at is either the abstract or the conclusion, because you're not going to read the whole thing. So in my case, I look at the conclusion first to see if it's something that's really relevant to what I'm interested in. And then I'll read the rest if it looks like it's useful. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why the conclusion is an important part of your paper. It's the thing that will get people to look at it. All right, do's and don'ts. You want to develop the abstract using the guidelines that are provided. And boy, you'd better, because these organizations have very strict requirements for the abstract. And if you stray from them, hey, you're out, baby. So you have to play the game, okay? You need a timeline, plan ahead so that you know when things should be done. Identify the resources that might be needed. If you have a budget that's needed, develop that. Plan the poster layout kind of generally, but when you're doing it, I say again, be brief and to the point. You should use color, and contrasting colors are good, but as we'll see in a moment, don't overdo it. Be sure you have a size and style of font that's easy to read. And I like the abstract on the poster, although we'll see somebody later on who says they don't. The thing don't use all capital letters. Remember on the internet, what do all capital letters mean? So you don't want to yell at everybody. Also, it gets more variety in the visual impact. We said no more than 10 words. Use no more than 2 or 3 contrasting colors. If you use too many, it kind of gets confusing. And certainly use audio visuals, photos, diagrams, whatever, graphs, definitely. Those are important parts of a study because that's what people look at. Now, this was something I found on the web, and it's kind of nicely laid out the do's and don'ts. This is obviously a research poster, and I guess they crossed out the institution, but typically we put those in. Now, these guys say posters really need abstracts. I personally disagree with that. I think an abstract is a great way to start because that's something they can read quickly and get the gist of what's going on. Look at the text, dissolves into intimidating, boring gray. Well, Again, you want the text to stand out from the background, and you want to have it large enough that it's fairly easy to read. You can have, again, they have too small and too much. I mean, boy, that's awfully busy, and you really can't read it. You want to make sure the captions align with with the pictures. Note that they say crammed. You know, you have the text crammed right against the top or the bottom, and it's not really a good idea. You want to leave a little bit of space there. Um, but on this one, I think they tried to write the whole paper and put it on the poster. And that's not really what you want to do. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So we are going to be making some quick judgments about some posters. So let's go to the next one. What are your thoughts about this one? Now, yeah, one of the problems you sometimes run into is when you take a poster and you put it into a PowerPoint spreadsheet to display, sometimes the text gets a little bit offset. I noticed that on the top. But there are some nice points in this and some not so nice points in this. One of the things that you sometimes see from a case study is they put the lab results in this diagrammatic form that you can see up there. And I guess for people who are literate with that probably makes it very easy to read. And it kind of gives you a very quick summary of what the background is. There's some other things. One thing that's really good is they have that blue arrow on the X-ray. And that's something that I really encourage if you're going to point something out on the X-ray or the illustration, put an arrow in there. That's not that hard to do. And in many cases, you know, when I'm reviewing people's posters or plans, they don't have the arrows in there, but they're talking about a structure. And put an arrow in so you know where the structure is, what you're talking about. It may be experts would know, but hey, you know, students might not. So put it in there. Now note that, oh no, go back please. Note that we have white on black here, and that's a little bit hard to read. You know, they're nice illustrations. They have a bunch of stuff down at the bottom of the the dark area, and I don't think there's the legends are that, well, I guess they're kind of implied. You can almost read them. But the other thing is, if you look at the text, it's a little bit too much. Note that the text on the left side is crammed right up to the top, and on the right side, they left a lot of space. So it does, you know, it doesn't quite balance well. And the title, it's okay. The white on, I guess that's purple, is all right. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay. Not much color here. Nice graphs, definitely useful. The text is not bad here. I'm not sure I like for the tables to have that kind of gray background. I'd like something maybe a little bit more colorful. It's a little bit hard to read the text on the gray. And if you look at the title, also the names, the blue kind of fades into the gray a little bit. I don't know. I'm a little bit colorblind, so maybe I can't see things as well as other people, but to me, it's a little bit hard to read. The title may be a little bit small, and I think you have more than 10 words here, but it's pretty descriptive. But, you know, not bad. I'd give it maybe a 3 or a 4. Okay, let's go on to the next one. All right, let's look at the title on this one. Can you read it? I can't. And look at the white on black. Um, that also is not ideal because it's hard to read. Decades ago, when we had CRTs for communicating with computers, they had white on a green background. It was a green, green screen, and they wrote on it in white or sometimes in black, but it wasn't that easy to read. Um, I think I'd have a lot of trouble trying to read this one with the white on the black. I kind of like the color for the separation of the parts of the study. That's kind of nice. And in their description of experimental groups, I can't read a thing. So that may be because of the fact that it didn't translate too well to display, but it probably also was light and very thin and probably hard to read. I do like the pig. Uh, Nice diagrams, nice color. Um, but that title, sometimes you will see titles even on the web that are hard to read. So if you use color in text, look at it and see if it's actually legible. Because I don't know. Tim, can you read the title on this one?
Barely. It's
It,
very difficult.
it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Um, and it probably looks about like that when it's actually up as a poster. So watch that. Um, so those are some basic thoughts that I have, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Tim right now for a little bit more detail about what the library can do for you and some of the specific techniques that can be used.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jens. So I'm going to show some tips for making your posters digital only, of course, and printing. And one of the takeaways, and hopefully, you've seen this link in the announcements and in the registration to this webinar, and it's also where the recording is going to be posted. We have our library guides on the library website. That's torolib.org. And I'll break out of the slides and I'll show you, in my browser once I go through. Um, this guide breaks down resources, tips, tools, um, uh, external websites that have examples of posters, undergraduate, professional conferences, etc. So I highly encourage students to use this guide, and I'll show you how to get there. What I wanted to point out is on the guide itself, there's my headshot there, of course, but you could email me. So my contact information is right there. You could click that button below that says schedule a meeting, and it'll put a meeting right on my calendar. So if you're having trouble putting together a poster for research day, or in the future, you're thinking about attending a conference virtually, maybe your abstract has been accepted and you have a poster ready and you're trying to format it, reach out to me, reach out to the libraries for help, and we're more than happy to provide some assistance and resources. The second red box there is the Toro College poster templates, which we'll take a look at. So you'll see that first link. You'll need a Box. So they're accessible through Box. So you should be able to log in with your Toro One credentials and access that file. Now, if you have any difficulties accessing it, again, reach out and reach out early, and we'll get those to you. We also have a link to the the posters up in Harlem. TCOM Harlem has their own library guide, which you could take a look at, and there's more resources which we'll take a look at together. So before I break out of the slides, right, I'm showing the Toro template, and here it is. You see Toro College and University system, the logo there. It's great. It's got the Toro colors, and then the boxes themselves here, okay, are completely customizable. So as Dr. Jens talked about, right, you may or may not have an abstract, but of course it's good to have something summarizing the research. Conclusions, you can move these around, and because of that light background, right, you could use the dark text and get a pretty good contrast. Of course, you could always change it, and I'll show you how to do that. Um, some technical notes here, right? We're using PowerPoint, so it's a single slide. When you download the file, there'll be a few slides that you could choose from. But really, that's all it is one slide, and you could set the dimensions. So you might present a poster digital only and then think, I want to print this out, for future events, or I will need to print this out for future events. And there you could see the dimensions, 48 inches wide, 36 inches tall. And, the conference will tell you the technical dimensions that are needed for printing, etc. So just take note of that. Lastly, PowerPoint is obviously a software program from Microsoft. So as a student, you should have access. But let's say you don't have access. Well, this file can be uploaded to Google Slides, and it's converted, and it will still work for you. So there are ways around that if you don't have access to PowerPoint. Um, and the slide presentation software, they're all kind of similar. Um, a note about charts and images, and as Dr. Yen said, the graphs are really excellent. Um, a picture says 1,000 words, and it's going to draw the audience's attention. It's going to keep them in front of your poster, and it might allow you to have that dialogue with the audience as they're attracted to your poster. So one of the points that I want to make is you can save the chart as a SVG file. That's a scalable vector graphics. So that's the file format. And what that does, it's really, responsive web designing. So when you look at a website on your phone, or you look at it on a TV or a computer, right, it scales the image based on the size of the screen. So you can see on the right, an SVG chart is going to be very clear when you scale it up, and it might also, depending on the output, you'll see it even change the categories to be slightly um, to fit better on the image. Whereas with like a JPEG, these are called the raster file types. Um, you see when you enlarge it, it gets blurry. So you're stretching those pixels out. And you don't want a blurry image, it's hard to read. So many programs will output this file format. Of course, you could always right click, save as, and try to convert it in the program. So PowerPoint will do that for you. And if you're using statistical software, RStudio, Tableau, even Google Charts and Excel, it will output it as a .svg. So calling your attention to that, you don't want blurry graphics. You want to make sure you have permission to use the images. So we have two guides here. One is generally about copyright. The other is about Creative Commons, which is a set of licenses that allows you to freely share images. So anything you pull from the web may or may not be a copyrighted image. And even on a Google search, right, it will say this image maybe have copyright. So we have some easy tools. One is the image finding that's coming from this Creative Commons library guide that allow you to find an image that you can reuse. Of course, if you created the chart yourself, you're the copyright owner. So you can reuse it. Without going into lots of detail about it, if you're in doubt about whether you can use an image or not, ask a librarian for help. Reach out to us, ask your advisor. Just going through some conference submission portals, most are going to ask you to ensure that you have permission to use an image. So really the burden is on you if you're putting your poster together to use an image which you have permission to use. So sort of breaking out of the slides, I'm going to first show you guys the LibGuide for posters. And let me switch the share here to my browser. So we're on torolib.org, and this is the link provided, right? libguides.torolib.org /posters /posters. And you'll see we have this information here for this webinar. This will be replaced with the recording. Some basic points, and of course, as I showed in the slides, the template file here, a place to email me, schedule a meeting, and then really a wealth of resources, examples, helpful tools, and some additional resources. So that's the link, but if you had to get here just from your browser, right, you go to the library homepage, which is torolib.org for the Toro College Libraries. And we have our LibGuides, our research guides, our library guides here. And very simply, you scroll through, maybe there's another topic that you want to look at for your coursework, your classes, poster presentations, and there it is. Okay. So for the template itself, let's take a look at that. You click that link, right? You've downloaded the template. It's a PowerPoint file, and it looks like this. Okay, we have Toro College there. Maybe we want to use this second slide, which is Toro College and University System. So I could just maybe delete those other slides. And I have the one I want. And as I said before, right, everything is customizable, so you can move around these boxes. Okay. If you didn't need it, you can delete it. Of course, filling in the title, filling in your name. As I said before, right, when you want to print out your poster, you could check the size of the slide here. If you go to custom slide, the great thing about the template is, right, it's pre-formatted with these values. So it's already made for like a 48 by 36 size poster. And as I said before, right, when you're using charts, you want something that can scale up. Well, they made the logo scalable too. And you could see, right, when I scale it up, it's not really blurry. Okay. Some additional notes, right? When we're using PowerPoint, we have our tabs up here. I believe they're called ribbons. And there you could play around with the design. So maybe you wanted to make the shape fill a different color, effects, etc. Change your font size. You can do all that from a template, and you don't have to start from scratch, is the point here. And of course, as you go, you save. You don't want to lose track of what you've done. And you could save as a PowerPoint or also as a PDF. So getting back to the final few slides here. And here we go. Again, to summarize, use the guide, use the templates. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Reach out for help if you need it. Reach out early. Use SVG for your charts. You want to make sure they're clear. Of course, the visuals are very important. Make sure you have permission. So those are those additional guides I talked about. And you could find openly licensed photos, especially medical related photos, fairly easily. NIH has a portal for photos which are in the public domain, so you could use them freely. And that information is on those guides. And some final tips here. Keep your fonts consistent, okay? So Format Painter is your friend. That's a tool on the Home tab of PowerPoint. It basically allows you to take the formatting of one section and apply it to any other section. Using high contrast text, sans serif fonts are better. So serifs are the little additions on font. So like if the S had a little line here, E, they're additional visual images that aren't necessary for you to discern a letter. So sans serif are generally better. And for digital preservation, make multiple digital copies. You don't want to lose a copy of something you put a lot of work into. And the way you do that is very, very simple. You make copies of it and you save it in multiple places. So you have it on your computer. You might put it on a flash drive. You might put it on a separate computer if you have like a laptop. That's good. And maybe the cloud as well. So if you have OneDrive, Google Drive, um, it's good to have it in separate geographic locations. If, in a very tragic circumstance you were to physically lose it in a fire or something like that. And then use a descriptive file name. So here I use, it's actually called camel case, where it's presentation, AHA, annual, the date. That'll allow you to have the file and know that you don't want to delete it for one, kind of remember what it's about. And just some final comments. As an undergraduate, poster sessions were one of the best research experiences I've had. So I remember very clearly a poster session I did as a junior on graffiti in fascist Rome. So it was a humanities-based poster, and what drew the audience to my poster was I mapped them, the places of graffiti on a map, and it was my main visual. And then I had my conclusions, how I gathered the primary sources, etc. And it allowed conversation. People came up to the poster and said, "Hey, have you thought about this? Or you should check out this resource. I'm a sociologist. I'm interested in XYZ." And that actually informed my thesis my senior year. So the posters are really uh, incubators for great ideas. And I think it's absolutely worth it to attend conferences, especially upcoming Toro Research Day. Um, I think it's just a wonderful experience.